My male boss didn't know I own 90% of the company stock. "We don't need incompetent people like you, leave," he said. I smiled politely and said fine, fire me. He had no idea how fun the next shareholders meeting would be. I was halfway through reviewing the quarterly sales data when Martin stormed into my office. No knock, no courtesy, just a loud deliberate entrance meant to rattle. Typical. "Elena," he barked, tossing a file onto my desk. "We need to talk." Now I glanced at the folder, then at the man I'd worked under for the last 4 years. Martin Reese, the kind of man who never looked twice at women in the office unless he needed coffee or someone to organize his calendar. He liked power. And more than that, he liked reminding others that he had it. Still, I stayed calm. I always did. "Of course," I replied, gesturing to the chair across from me. He didn't sit. Instead, he loomed. "The board's decided to restructure the leadership team. We're moving in a different direction. And frankly, we need people who can lead, not just follow spreadsheets." I blinked, stunned for half a second. "You're firing me?" He smirked, like he just sunk a game-winning shot. "Let's not be dramatic. We're releasing you from your position, effective immediately. No warning, no performance review, and certainly no recognition for the fact that my department had just delivered the highest revenue growth in 3 years. "I see," I said quietly. "May I ask why?" His tone was clipped. "You lack vision. You manage tasks, not people. And let's be honest, this industry, it needs strong leadership, assertiveness, confidence, traits you haven't exactly demonstrated." There it was, not even veiled, a dig at my gender wrapped in buzzwords and corporate fluff. He didn't see me as a leader, not because I hadn't delivered, but because I didn't fit his outdated mold. "I understand," I said, my voice steady, neutral. Martin narrowed his eyes, clearly thrown off by my composure. He expected outrage, maybe even tears, but I'd learned long ago how to control my emotions in boardrooms full of egos. "I'll need your badge and company laptop by the end of the day," he added. "It will disable your access by 5 p.m. HR has your severance details." I nodded and stood, extending my hand. "Thank you, Martin. I appreciate the clarity." He hesitated, but shook my hand. "Good luck out there." As he turned and walked out satisfied with his little coup, I sat back down and exhaled slowly. My hands didn't shake. My breath didn't quicken. In fact, I felt lighter, because what Martin didn't know, what no one in that building knew, was that I wasn't just a department head. 2 weeks ago, something changed, something big, and I had been waiting for the right moment to use it. I glanced at the framed photo on my desk. My father smiling proudly at the ribbon-cutting ceremony on the day he opened the company's first regional office, the same company Martin had just released me from. I ran my fingers along the edge of the frame. "You told me to wait, Dad. Wait until the time was right." I stood and began packing my things. I didn't take much. Just a few personal items, a mug my team gave me last Christmas, and a stack of old notebooks filled with ideas that had never made it past Martin's desk. Outside, the office buzzed with quiet curiosity. A few coworkers gave me sympathetic glances. Others avoided eye contact. No one asked questions, but I saw the thoughts on their faces. Did she get fired? What did she do wrong? I left the building with a small, polite smile and no fanfare. As I stepped into the sunlight, I felt the weight of 15 years inside that company slip off my shoulders. They thought they'd ended my career, but what they'd actually done was give me the green light. I reached for my phone and texted a single message to my lawyer. "It's time. Prepare everything." The reply came back almost instantly. "Understood. Shareholder meeting can be scheduled within 5 business days." I looked back at the glass building glinting in the sun. Martin thought this was over, but he had no idea what was coming. The next time I walked into that boardroom, it wouldn't be as an employee, it would be as their majority shareholder. And the smile I wore that day would be real. 2 weeks earlier, I had sat in the quiet wood-paneled office of my family's attorney, staring at a document I wasn't allowed to open until the clock struck 12 on my 30th birthday. My father had always loved theatrics. He said it made serious things feel significant, and this apparently was one of them. "Elena," Mr. Harrington, our longtime family lawyer, had said with a warm fatherly tone, "Your father left very clear instructions. You're not to open this envelope until your 30th birthday, not a day before." I had smiled politely, half curious, half amused. "What is it? Some kind of delayed birthday card?" He gave me a look that told me he knew and that he wasn't about to spoil the surprise. "Your father was a man of vision," he said instead, "and he trusted you more than anyone." That sentence stayed with me in the days that followed. My father, the founder and former CEO of the very company that had just let me go without ceremony, had always believed in foresight, in planning ahead, and he believed in me. When he passed away 5 years ago, the company changed. It became colder, more calculated, less about the people and more about the numbers. Martin had joined shortly after, charming the board, flexing his MBA, and slowly dismantling the culture my father had built. I'd stayed thinking I could protect what remained, but now I realized my father had known something like this might happen, and he'd prepared for it. On the morning of my birthday, I opened the envelope alone, sitting in the same spot where he used to read the paper every Sunday. Sunlight streaming through the window, a quiet warmth in the air. Inside was a letter and a formal document with embossed seals. I unfolded the letter first. It was handwritten in my father's neat script. "Elena, if you're reading this, you've turned 30, and that means you're ready." I never doubted it, not for a second. "You've spent your life working twice as hard for half the recognition. I saw it even when you thought I didn't. I saw the sacrifices, the late nights, the integrity no one else noticed. I also saw how the company changed after I left. And I knew there might come a time when you'd need more than a seat at the table, so I gave you the table. I paused, blinking hard. My hands trembled slightly as I turned to the document behind the letter. It was a trust agreement, filed and notarized. According to the trust, 90% of the company shares my father had retained when he stepped down had been placed under my name, held until I turned 30, with full voting rights activated immediately by 90%. I read it 3 times, then once more just to be sure I wasn't dreaming. I wasn't just a shareholder, I was the majority owner, the controlling shareholder. My entire body buzzed with disbelief, adrenaline, and something else. Power. Quiet, measured, undeniable power. I called Mr. Harrington immediately. "Is this real?" I asked, barely able to get the words out. "Yes," he replied simply. "Your father structured the trust to avoid public filings. It was airtight. The board has no idea unless you choose to tell them. Why didn't he activate it sooner? He wanted you to experience the company on your own terms first, to see who would reveal themselves, to decide if you wanted it before you used it." That line hit me hard. I'd spent years being underestimated, overlooked, talked over in meetings. I'd watched Martin get praised for ideas I'd quietly suggested, watched male colleagues rise faster despite doing less. I'd smiled through it all, thinking patience and hard work would pay off. Now I realized it hadn't been time that was missing. It was leverage, and suddenly, I had it. I scheduled a follow-up with Mr. Harrington for the next day. "Let's talk about what comes next," I said. He didn't miss a beat. "We'll prepare the documents to call for a shareholders meeting. We'll notify the board once everything's ready." "Don't notify them yet," I said. "Not until I give the word." There was a pause on the line. "Elena, may I ask what you're planning?" I looked out the window of my apartment watching the traffic roll by. People rushing, unaware that everything was about to change. "I'm planning to walk into that boardroom," I said calmly, "and show them exactly who they tried to fire." I didn't show up for the mandatory exit interview. HR called twice, then emailed. I ignored them both. Instead, I sat in the quiet corner booth of a discreet downtown cafe, sipping a flat white while Mr. Harrington reviewed the final draft of the shareholder meeting request. It was official now. On paper, I held 90% of the company's voting power, a legal and financial reality Martin would never have seen coming. "You sure you're ready?" Harrington asked, adjusting his glasses as he slid the documents across the table. "Once you submit this, you'll be throwing a grenade into their boardroom." I looked him in the eye, my voice steady. "They pulled the pin the moment they fired me." He gave a small nod. "Fair enough." The documents were simple as most powerful things often are. A formal notice of a special shareholder meeting with a single agenda item, leadership review, and appointment of new executive management. Martin wouldn't be expecting it. That was the point. His entire style was built on control through confidence. He bulldozed meetings with jargon, steamrolled quieter voices, and weaponized charm when needed. The board, mostly older men who liked his bravado, had let him run unchecked for too long. They'd soon discover how fragile that kind of power really was. "I'll serve them notice Friday morning," Harrington continued. "The meeting will be set for Tuesday. That gives them 2 business days to panic." I couldn't help but smile. Perfect. That afternoon, I sat down with Caroline Winters, the trustee who had managed the shares since my father's passing. She was sharp, discreet, and had a memory like steel. "I've watched that man dismantle your father's legacy brick by brick," she said, sliding a folder across her desk. "You don't owe him politeness." Inside the folder was everything I'd need for Tuesday: ownership certificates, voting records, and a detailed summary of company performance under Martin's leadership, declining employee satisfaction scores, rising turnover, overspending on executive perks, and a flattening revenue trajectory despite a growing market. "He's been hiding under inflated projections," Caroline said flatly. "If this continues, he'll drive the company into the ground within 2 years." I nodded, absorbing every word. "I'll let the numbers speak for themselves." As I left her office, I walked past the mural in the hallway. An oil painting of my father standing in front of the first company headquarters. He was younger in the painting than I ever remembered him in life. His hand rested on the shoulder of a small girl in a red dress. Me. He believed in legacy and in people. And even though he wasn't here anymore, I could still feel his hand on my shoulder. By Monday morning, the buzz around my sudden disappearance had turned into full-blown rumors. I got texts from former colleagues. "What happened? Did you quit?" "Martin's acting like nothing happened, but HR is weirdly tight-lipped. Whatever you did, I hope you're okay." I didn't respond. Not yet. The silence was part of the plan. I wanted Martin confident, certain he'd erased me from the story. Let him play king a little longer. Let him underestimate me one last time. That evening, I stood in front of my mirror trying on the navy suit I'd bought for special occasions but never worn. It was sharp, tailored, clean. The kind of outfit you wear when you walk into a room not to ask for power, but to own it. I practiced what I'd say, not a speech, just a few lines, precise, measured, undeniable. The truth would do most of the work for me. Tuesday morning arrived crisp and cool. The city bustled as usual, unaware that inside one boardroom, everything was about to change. I arrived 10 minutes early, walking past the receptionist with quiet confidence. She did a double take, but didn't stop me. Upstairs, the boardroom lights were already on. I could see movement through the frosted glass. Mr. Harrington met me by the elevators, his expression unreadable but calm. "They're in there," he said. "Martin's already speaking. He thinks this is just another quarterly strategy review." Not for long. I took a slow breath, smoothed the front of my jacket, and stepped forward. The door to the boardroom opened with a soft click. Heads turned, conversation stilled. And Martin, mid-sentence, froze when he saw me. "Elena," he said, eyebrows arching. "This meeting is for board members only." I smiled politely, setting the ownership documents on the table. "Exactly." Then I took my seat at the head of the table. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. Martin stared at me from the far end of the long oak table, confusion flickering across his face, followed by disbelief. I could practically see the gears turning in his head, trying to place me back in the box he thought he'd locked me in last week. "Elena," he said again, voice sharp now. "This is a board meeting. As I already mentioned, employees are not permitted." "I'm not here as an employee," I said calmly. "I'm here as the majority shareholder." That one sentence shifted the entire energy of the room. Board members glanced at one another, some stiffening, others sitting forward with interest. One of them, Mr. Dalton, who had been with the company since my father's days, looked down at the document I'd placed in front of him, then back up at me with raised eyebrows. "Is this accurate?" he asked, adjusting his glasses. "It is," I replied. 90% of the company shares were transferred to me through a family trust when I turned 30. All paperwork is in order, filed, notarized, and submitted in accordance with corporate governance. Martin looked from me to Mr. Harrington, who was calmly unfolding a copy of the ownership certificate and handing it to the board secretary. "You can't be serious." Martin scoffed, his voice rising. "This is absurd. Why would your father?" "Because he trusted me," I interrupted, "and because he knew exactly what this company would become without oversight." The room was still again. Everyone knew what I meant, even if I didn't say it outright. Since my father's death, Martin had turned the culture toxic. He rewarded loyalty over competence, appearance over results, and the numbers had started to show it. "Let's get to the point," I continued, opening the second folder I'd brought. "As majority shareholder, I've called this special meeting to review the current executive leadership, including the position of Chief Executive Officer." Martin stood now, his face flushed. "This is a coup, a personal vendetta. You think you can waltz in here and I'm not asking," I said, finally raising my voice just enough to command the room. "I'm exercising my rights." Then I slid the financial report across the table. "Let's talk about performance." I didn't need theatrics. The numbers spoke for themselves. Employee satisfaction down 38% in 2 years. Turnover in key departments up 47%. 3 high-level discrimination complaints under HR review. Flat revenue growth in a market that was booming. I've compiled testimony from department heads, employee surveys, and financial audits. I've also documented misuse of company funds, unauthorized travel, excessive executive bonuses, and misleading investor reports. I glanced at Martin. "All signed off under your leadership." Board members began flipping through the pages. Mr. Dalton looked genuinely disturbed. The CFO, who had sat quietly until now, leaned over to whisper something to the general counsel, who immediately began typing on his tablet. Martin's jaw clenched. "You're twisting data to make your little revenge fantasy look legitimate." "I don't need to twist anything," I said. "I have evidence. You relied on the assumption that no one powerful enough would ever question you. That assumption ends today." I let that hang in the air for a moment. "Effective immediately," I said, pulling out the final document. "I am submitting a motion to remove Martin Rees as CEO of this company. As majority shareholder, my vote is sufficient to carry the motion." The board secretary looked stunned. You don't need a second vote?" "I own 90%, I said simply. "A majority by any definition." Mr. Dalton cleared his throat. "In accordance with company bylaws, the motion stands, effective upon completion of documentation." Martin slammed a hand on the table. "You can't do this." "I already did." Security didn't need to be called. Martin didn't resist, but as he stormed out, his face a twisted mix of rage and disbelief, I noticed something remarkable. He didn't look powerful anymore. He looked small. Once the door clicked shut behind him, I exhaled slowly and turned to face the rest of the board. "This company deserves better," I said. "So do its people. And starting today, that's exactly what they're going to get." Mr. Dalton nodded slowly, a faint smile forming. "Welcome back, Elena." By the end of the week, Martin's nameplate had been removed from the CEO's office door. I didn't move into the office immediately. I didn't need the symbolism of a bigger desk to confirm my position. I had something more important to do first: rebuild the soul of the company my father started. The Monday following the shareholders' meeting, I called an all-hands staff meeting in the main conference hall, the same space where Martin had once paraded sales projections like war medals and handed out empty praise to the same handful of executives over and over again. But this time, the energy was different: curious, hesitant, hopeful. Employees filed in slowly, murmuring among themselves. The front rows were empty as if no one wanted to seem too eager. Some looked nervous, others suspicious. They'd been burned before. I stood alone at the front of the room holding no notes, no slides, just my truth. "Some of you know me," I began. "Some of you only know what you've been told. But let me start by saying this. I didn't come here to take power. I came here to restore trust." A few heads tilted. People were listening. For years, this company ran on the strength of its people, on your ideas, your late nights, your belief that what we were building mattered. And somewhere along the way, that got lost. I paused, letting the silence fill the room. I was fired last week, I said, smiling faintly, told I wasn't what this company needed, that I lacked the leadership to take us into the future. A few people chuckled nervously at first, but the tension began to shift. My honesty was disarming them. I didn't fight back. Not then, because I knew something Martin didn't. That leadership isn't about volume or vanity. It's about vision and respect and lifting the people who actually do the work. I looked out over the crowd, locking eyes with a few familiar faces, engineers I'd worked alongside for years, assistants who were always overlooked, junior analysts who had been stuck under layers of corporate ego. Starting today, everything changes. Over the next 2 weeks, I did something radical. I listened. I met with department heads, team leads, interns, receptionists, custodial staff. I asked what wasn't working. I asked what they needed. I asked who they thought deserved more than they were getting. And then I acted. I promoted Maya from the customer service team to head of client experience, a role she'd unofficially been doing for a year while her actual manager took credit for every success. I brought back Kevin, a brilliant product developer who had resigned after being repeatedly passed over for promotion in favor of less qualified men. I restructured HR entirely. The complaints that had gathered dust in forgotten folders, I read every single one. Several mid-level managers were quietly let go within the first week, people who had cultivated cultures of fear and favoritism under Martin's watch. Then I launched something my father had once dreamed of, the People First Initiative, a new internal program to recognize innovation, reward collaboration, and promote equity no matter the job title. No more whisper networks, no more glass ceilings, just good people doing great work, and finally getting credit for it. Late one evening, I walked the halls of the office alone. The energy was different now, softer, brighter. The break room had laughter again. People were staying late because they wanted to, not because they feared what would happen if they didn't. Desks were decorated again. Photos of families, plants, personality, things that had slowly disappeared under Martin's reign. In one quiet hallway, I passed a whiteboard near the engineering bullpen. Someone had scrawled in blue marker. She came back. 3 simple words underlined twice. I stood there a moment reading it over and over. Not she took over. Not she fired Martin. She came back. That mattered more than any title I now held. The following week, I finally moved into the CEO's office, not because I needed the space, but because it was time. The nameplate was new. Sleek brushed steel with simple elegant lettering. Elena Wren, Chief Executive Officer. I didn't bring much with me. Just one framed photo. My father and I on the company's opening day, both smiling, both hopeful. I placed it on the corner of the desk and sat down, not with a sense of conquest, but of continuation. This wasn't just my company now. It was my responsibility, and I intended to honor it. It was exactly 1 year to the day since I'd been fired. 12 months since I walked out of this building with a cardboard box and a polite smile, dismissed as not what the company needed. 12 months since Martin had stripped me of my title, unaware that I held something far more powerful. And now, as I stood in front of the same glass doors, this time in a tailored suit, a sleek leather folder under my arm, and the full weight of the company's future resting on my shoulders, I felt something unexpected. Not anger, not triumph, just peace. I nodded to the front desk receptionist who now stood the moment I entered. "Morning, Miss Wren." "Elena, please," I said with a smile. "We're all on the same team." The elevators chimed softly as I rode to the top floor. What used to be Martin's domain. Now it was mine, but I hadn't remodeled it for show. I kept the original walnut desk, the same broad windows overlooking the city. What changed were the photos on the walls, images of our employees, of team retreats, of product launches led by names that had too often gone unrecognized. And on the far wall, directly behind my chair, hung a large portrait of my father, not as a monument to him, but as a reminder to me. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and began reviewing the quarterly report. It was our strongest quarter in 5 years. Customer satisfaction up 23%. Employee retention up 41%. Revenue, breaking records. But what mattered more was how we did it, ethically, collaboratively, transparently. The company culture had shifted. People no longer whispered complaints over coffee. They spoke freely and were actually heard. Feedback loops were open. Diversity and leadership had doubled. We didn't just bring good people in. We finally gave them a place to grow. There was a soft knock on the door. "Come in," I said. It was Maya, now the head of client experience. Her eyes sparkled even behind her glasses. "You ready?" she asked. "They're waiting in the conference room." I stood, smoothing the front of my blazer. "Let's do it." The boardroom looked different now too. Not in decor, but in presence. For the first time in company history, half the board were women. Several members were 40. They brought new perspectives, asked harder questions, and made better decisions. At the center of the table sat Richard Tanaka, one of our new strategic advisors, brilliant mind, decent heart, the kind of person my father would have trusted. "Before we begin," Richard said, gesturing toward me, "Elena has a few words." I hadn't planned to speak, but standing there with every eye on me, not in judgment, but in respect, I realized something. This was the moment my father had prepared me for. "I want to thank you all," I said, "for believing in change, for making hard decisions when easy ones would have been safer, and for helping me rebuild a company that puts people before power." I paused, letting the words settle. "Someone once told me I lacked leadership," I continued. But leadership isn't about volume or title. It's about vision, accountability, and the courage to do what's right, especially when it's inconvenient. I smiled, not for show, but for real. My father built this company with those values. I'm proud to say, we're finally living up to them again. A quiet beat, then applause. Not thunderous, just warm, genuine. The kind that stays with you. That afternoon, I took the long way back to my office, walking through each department, the way I used to when I was just another face in the crowd. I stopped to check in with teams, to laugh with developers, to high-five marketing interns who just pulled off their first big campaign. In the break room, someone had baked cupcakes for an intern's last day. I took one, sat down among them, and talked about nothing important for 20 minutes because this wasn't just a company. It was a place where people felt they belonged, and that, more than stock prices or titles or revenge, was the real win.